was Naaman the Ammonite, not an Israelite. Well, don't forget, Solomon had all these, there you go, all these relationships with all these foreign women. He's not supposed to, by the way. It's a direct violation of God's law. And this one was an Ammonite, so this guy's partial Ammonite and partial Israelite. But we go back to our text in 1 Kings 12, just a few chapters earlier. First verse, Rehoboam went to Shechem, that central location, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. How old is he again? We're getting there, aren't we? Pretty quickly. So he's not a whippersnapper. He's 41 years old. He's a man, so he ought to know by now, having watched his father govern his people for all these years, kind of how to do things, not to do things. Undoubtedly, he's been groomed for this purpose. And you'll see that all Israel had gone. The whole nation is still united. That's interesting. Everyone still is in agreement. This guy is going to be our king. You know, I'm not certain of that. I'm not sure that we know. It would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah, has anyone else looked into that? Yeah, has anyone else looked into that? The descendancy listings? Let's do that in the off season, okay? Between next class period, that's a good thought. I'm going to guess probably so, wouldn't you? It'd make a lot of sense. Okay, verse 2. So it happened when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard it. So these another Boam here, but this is someone totally different, completely different family, different tribe. It happened when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard it, for he was still in Egypt. For he had fled from the presence of King Solomon and had been dwelling in Egypt. That they, and that would seem to refer to Israel, going back as an antecedent, Israel, and this is probably more Israel is going to be recognized, and sometimes you see recognized. I don't believe this is all Israel, but this is like the northern sector. Remember, even going back to the days of the judges, there has been this geographical and political, maybe even to a degree religious divide going on among God's people. There's the north, Israel, and there's the south, Judah. Even years before the civil conflict in America, there was the geographical, you can talk about the Mason-Dixon line, but there was a geographical, the political, I don't know if it was much religious back then, but divide in this nation, and there's a divide going back years prior to the official breakup in Israel. They, Israel, the northern sector, it appears, sent and called him. Then Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel, would appear more this northern portion of Israel, came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, okay, let's stop right here and let's remind ourselves, who is this Jeroboam character? And we don't need to, we know the son of Nebat and all that kind of, you're right. But who is he? What's the background here? You, sir. Very good. He's going to serve as the first king in the northern sector of Israel. That hasn't happened yet, though, has it? And it never had to happen. I don't know if you feel this way, but I look back at the years of the Civil War in our country, and it just breaks my heart that it even happened. And we have so much of, well, what do you think? Or do you align with the viewpoints of the North and the South? And no one's talking about, slavery and the divide of that, but just, your view of all these kinds of different things as far as among Christians. But in my opinion, it never should have happened. I feel like it was so avoidable. After everything we've been through, can we not just get together and talk about this and the hundreds of thousands of lives that were lost and the families that were ruined and the country that was destroyed and the hard feelings that still exist 150 plus years after that? Is there no way we could have? It can be avoided. It should have been avoided, in my opinion. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's still tremendous effects of the Civil War in our country today. The point of which, though, is this. This could be avoided right here. It never had to come to division in the country. So let's go back and let's be reminded of Jeroboam and why he hasn't been in Israel for some time anyway. This is just the previous chapter from last week. Chapter 11, verse 26. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zeradah, a servant of Solomon, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, you might recall, meaning leper, a widow, also lifted up his hand against the king. You might have in your translation, rebelled against. That's the meaning. He rebelled against the king. You have a dictatorship in place and you rebel against the authoritarian dictator, what happens? That's treason. What happens with treason? That's capital punishment. You die if you stick around. He's smart. He doesn't stick around. So he has rebelled and he's gotten out of Dodge. He spent time in Egypt. He hears that Solomon is dead. And then the assembly of Israel sends to this guy to come back because they want him to go talk to the new king, Rehoboam. That is red flag number one as far as just red hot tensions in Israel. The fact that they want a rebel in Israel to come back and talk to the king who is defiant toward the other king, a little bit of a warning sign. So they bring him back in verse 3 of chapter 12, and they say to him in verse 4, your father made our yoke heavy. And by the way, this is after they kind of coax him, and Jeroboam and this whole group comes in before the new king, Rehoboam. Your father made our yoke heavy. Now, therefore, lighten the burdensome service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. Remember, Solomon's so well known for all of these building projects. What does it take to bring a governmental dream to fruition? Just a little magical thing, no big deal. Manpower, okay, good. And you have to fund that, right? Supplies, they don't grow on trees. Well, some of them do, but it still takes money to bring those trees down and to utilize them and to refine them. All these big governmental dreams can all come true if you will just vote yes on your next. It's many billions of dollars is what this takes. And for Solomon, it's not just the temple, it's not just his palace, but as well it's the whole city, this elaborate, he becomes obsessed with building, and this takes tons of money. This results in heavy taxation of the people. It results in a lot of drafting that needs to occur for people to be laborers and including officers as far as the Israelites go over all these slaves from these conquered peoples. And so all Israel brings Jeroboam home, who had rebelled against the king before. Okay, stay where you are again. Turn back to the previous chapter. You might not even need to flip. Let's keep reading in chapter 11, verses 27 and 28. We're reminded. This was the reason why he rebelled. He lifted up his hand against the king. Solomon built the Millo, and that's the ramparts, the mounds. It's the dirt filling from all of the construction that went on. Took a lot of manpower and a lot of cost. And he closed up the breach of the city of David, his father. The man Jeroboam was very able, and when Solomon saw that the young man, that is Jeroboam, was industrious, he gave him charge over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. So we're told that he rebelled against the king, and then we're informed why he rebelled. Why is he so upset? That's a big deal to risk your own life. Why would he be willing to risk his own life? What's the cause in which he believes? Jeroboam is a part of the original Tea Party. This is the Boston Tea Party going on right here. Taxed enough already is the way he feels. He is fed up with the bureaucracy. He is fed up with Solomon's pet building projects. And let's not forget who Jeroboam is. This guy is not a pampered individual. He's never had a silver spoon in his mouth. What's his background again? He's an Ephraimite from the town. Whenever he says it, people would say, from where? They've never heard of this. Okay, at best, it's a little dot on the map. It might not even have a post office, the place from which he comes. And his dad has passed away, and so his mother is a widow. Undoubtedly, he grows up probably dirt floor poor. And it's mentioned that his mother's name is Zeruiah, which means leper. That probably has something to do with whether her or the family. And listen, it's been a rough existence for this guy. He knows what it's like to be at the very bottom. And then he sees this high-toting, fluting aristocrat living his pampered, pleasured life and oppressing the people, and he gets drafted into this service he probably doesn't want to be in to head up a project in which he probably doesn't even believe, and he puts his foot down and he says, "I've had enough," to the king. And perhaps he gets other people on board with him also. This would result in the loss of his life if he sticks around. But wisely, he flees out of this place. Now, when we fast forward to chapter 12, after he's lived probably for years, maybe even a decade or a decade and a half in Egypt, it makes perfect sense why all Israel who believes and feels this same way would send to this guy, have him come back from Egypt and to lead this charge. He's already been a leader among the people. They know he believes in the same cause in which they believe. They want this heavy taxation stopped. They want these drafts to end. And they just want to be able to go about their normal lives once more. Makes a lot of sense. Verse 5, back in chapter 12. So this request has been made of the new king in waiting, Rehoboam. We want some help. We want a break from all this taxation. And they've gotten Jeroboam to express this to the king on their behalf. So he said to them, "Okay, depart for 3 days, and then come back to me." And the people departed. I believe this shows tremendous wisdom early on, wisdom that he's probably learned from his father. There's a big decision that needs to be made. It shouldn't just be a split decision. I should think about this. There may be some significance, and I need 3. 3 days. We know 3 to be the divine number. Perhaps here he's thinking, I want divine wisdom here to intervene. I want to be able to make the best decision. He also shows tremendous wisdom in not making this decision on his own. Any executive officer in government does well to surround himself or herself with people that are going to inform them and tell them what they need to hear, which might not always be what they want to hear. We call this the cabinet of our executive officer. And so there are these advisors. Verse 6, then King Rehoboam consulted the elders, the wise ones, who had stood before his father Solomon, have tons of experience in this kinds of thing, while he still lived. And he said, "How do you advise me to answer this people?" This sounds very open, honest, and objective. You just tell me what I need to hear. That's what I want to know. All right, who would like to say our memory verse in number 7, 1 Kings 12:7? Roy? Pretty simple advice right here. What do you think I ought to do? And by the way, the thing I love about studying the Old Testament, I don't care if this is a leader among God's people or if it's a leader out in the world, if it's a leader of God's people as we have here 3,000 years ago, or a leader of God's people today in his true kingdom, the church. This is what it takes to be a successful leader. Tremendous advice that's passed on, buddies. Go ahead, Roy. Yeah, really, even if you're not a leader, even if you're being led and you're a follower, it's still great advice. The principles that are involved, very good, Roy. Sure, absolutely. Okay, so let's go through this. So this is the advice that's given to Rehoboam. You're wondering what you ought to do. They say, this is what we've observed. This is what we think is going to give you maximum success. To be a successful leader of God's people in his kingdom, this is what you need to do. You need to be a servant to this people and serve them. Don't carry yourself like a lord. Don't carry yourself like a king, even though that's what you are, okay? But instead, act like a peasant. Act like a servant to these people. That's what's so vital in this circumstance. Now, if we go back to a couple generations up, absolutely, yeah, you carry yourself like a ruthless lord, and you're not going to get respect, and people aren't going to want to learn, right? Absolutely. So let's go up a couple of generations here. David, the people love David. Do you remember what it was, though, that stated, especially early on? What did they like so much about David? And yeah, he's a champion on the battlefield, and he defeated the Philistine and hundreds of Philistines, if not thousands of them. But what's unique about David? He was very humble, definitely. Remember when his newly found wife of the previous regime, Saul, Now, she'd grown up with a silver spoon in her mouth. Saul hadn't, but she had always had the silver spoon for her mouth. And she's upset with David because he has on a T-shirt and he's just running in and out with the people. He looked like and was acting like one of the base fellows, she says, or one of the peasants. And he was so upset with her, he sent her away, and they never had anything to do with each other. She went to her grave childless. And I think what it is he was, in part anyway, so upset that she thought they were better than everybody else. One of the things that's mentioned about David is that he went in and out among the people. And right after that it stated all the people loved David. He acted like a servant, just like one of them. He acted like a peasant, even though he was someone very special that God had chosen to be the next king. David did not grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth. But then we have Solomon. Solomon's always been the child of a king. Solomon grows up with a silver spoon in his mouth. And then we find out that Solomon no longer is satisfied with silver. He wants everything to be solid gold. Would you give me that trash silver cup? Go get me a gold one. I don't drink out of anything but gold. And that's kind of the way he is. He becomes obsessed with all this elaborate stuff within the kingdom. And it seems like over time the people kind of sour on this. They don't like that about the king. They want someone normal, or at least that acts normal like them, who understands and lives the same life that they do. I've long thought and said this about government, that if our governmental officials, and this has nothing to do with parties, anything like that, but if our governmental officials had to live by all the ordinances that they put in place for us common people, I think it would change some of the ordinances that are put in place. There are many of them where there are exceptions, and they can do this instead. But the rest of us, we have to be a part of this program, and we have to run these programs that have been put into place and these different ideas. That's basically the advice that's been given here. We're upset with the taxation. We're upset with this draft that's taking place. It's forcing us into lives and jobs that we don't want to work. Essentially, they just kind of want some of their freedom back, is what they're asking for. And as well, he tells them, if you'll be a servant among them, if you'll somewhat live the same kind of life that they're living, that's probably going to take care of itself. Yeah, I believe so. A populist would fit for Jeroboam. Yep. So this is the advice that he's given them. Be a servant among this people. Serve them. And this is the other thing as a leader. It's so vital. Answer them. So they have concerns that have been brought up. And listen, not Jeroboam, but Rehoboam is the most powerful man in the country. And he could say, whatever, and just brush him off and not even talk to him. He says, no, listen, you need to address this. They're concerned about this. Sit down and talk with them about it. And the third thing is this. When you talk with them, be careful how you speak with them. He's told to speak good words to them. I believe that probably means be kind to them and be respectful to them. Don't talk down to them like you're above them. And yeah, you're the leader, but don't act like they're nothing whenever you speak to them. And he says, if you'll take this approach to them, if you will be a servant to them, and you'll live among them and like them, and you will serve them, and when they have concerns, you sit down and you'll talk with them about it, and you answer them, and you speak kindly and respectful to them, what does he say will be the result? They'll be your servants for how long? They will adore you. They will follow your leading. And really, is that not great advice for government today? Government in our world. If you'll be a servant to them, live life like them, hey, whatever rules you put into place, those are rules for you also. You live by them. You go in and out among them. You act like a common person. You live like a common person. And you treat them well. When they have concerns, you don't brush them off. You sit down and you talk with them about those things. You answer them when they have questions. And you speak kindly and respectfully to them. And you're going to have a great country that's united. Governmentally, we would have that. Of course, there's a greater lesson that we can and we should apply to this. Spiritually, as the fulfillment of God's kingdom, what are we going to have? But a happy, united people of God when we have servants in this way. Okay, I want to make a couple of applications. One's Old Testament. Do you recall going back about 500 years to Moses? God has chosen this man to be his leader who takes the children of Israel out of captivity. And so Moses decides, okay, now's the time. And he goes right in after he's had all of this nice education. He has a doctorate degree in Egyptian, whatever it is, philosophy. By now, he's been educated in all the ways of the Egyptian. He's a smart college graduate. He has everything, the whole world figured out how to operate. And he takes this, having lived in the palace all of his life, and he goes in among the slaves who are being beaten and worked like dogs, his fellow people, the Israelites. And he starts to tell them the way things ought to go and how he's their leader and so on. And he's so shocked when one of them has the gall one day to say, "Who made you a judge and a ruler over us?" They reject him as their leader, and he's scared and sad, and he runs away, spends 40 years in the back of the desert. He goes and he has children, a couple of sons we're told, and he shepherds sheep. And after 40 years, he's 80 years old, God shows up and he says, "No, now's the time that I originally had in mind. I want you to go and lead this people." And he's like, "Well, what are my qualifications? How am I going to do that now? 40 years removed from my college education?" And well, now it makes perfect sense because he's learned how to manage people. Now he knows what it's like to have families, as so many of them, a family as so many of them had already had. Now he knows how to shepherd sheep, which, by the way, is the natural trade of the Israelites. He's become a servant, just like every one of them. And now he's ready to lead. And when he goes back, he's not so firm and harsh in his speech. He answers them and the concerns that they have. He speaks kindly and respectfully to them, and they all just walk right behind him and just walk out of the place of captivity in Egypt. In the Lord's church, 1 Peter 5, verses 1 through 3, and talking about the leadership of God's kingdom and the shepherding that needs to take place of sheep. It's mentioned, nor as being lords over them, but being examples or servants to the flock. It's what it takes to be a successful leader. And as I appreciate what Roy said. It's true of being a leader anyway, but really it's just who we ought to be, period. Just servants. Even if we're not leaders of a business or of the church, we ought to have this mentality. So, be one of the people, essentially, is what he said. They'll follow you all the days of their life. Verse 8 of chapter 12, 1 Kings. But he rejected the advice. This is great, godly advice. Why? He rejected the advice which the elders had given him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. It's really dangerous when you're trying to set up an advisory board if you're in an important position and you just surround yourself with all your buddies with whom you went to school. Not very smart. I mean, you want people who maybe aren't so personally connected to you, number one, but as well, number two, people who have experience. I doubt these guys have a lot of experience in politics and a lot of experience in working with people. And he said to them, "What advice do you give?" Now before he asked the elders, "How do you advise me to answer these people?" Here he asked, "What advice do you give? How should we answer this people?" But he says more to his friends, "Who have spoken to me, saying, 'Lighten the yoke which your father put on us.'" If we were in court, we might hear, "Objection, leading the witness," and we might hear as a response, "Sustained." I think he is really letting them know, here's what I want you to tell me, so what do you think? They've insulted me, they've insulted my dad, how do you think I ought to respond to them? Verse 10, then the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, "Thus you should speak to the people who have spoken to you, saying, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us. Thus you shall say to them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist,'" which sounds kind of silly to us, but that's a maxim, a proverb at that time. We're essentially saying, "Oh, you think that's bad? Well, I'm going to make it 100 times worse on you," is what he's saying. And compared to this, what's your pinky compared to your waist? And that's the point here that he's making. You're not going to push me around. is what these young men who'd grown up with him tells him to communicate to his people. And now, verse 11, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. You think you had a lot of work? I'm going to give you more work to do. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges. You have another word there for scourges? Scorpions. That's literally the translation right here. My dad hit you with whips, I'm going to hit you with scorpions. Those are nasty dudes over in the Middle East. We've talked about those, the death stalker scorpion in particular. Some rankings, number 3 or number 2, deadliest scorpion in the world. Extremely painful when you get stung by this little guy. He could mean this literally in the sense of some believe that there was a whip that was called a scorpion. And it had some kind of piece on the end that would really dig into your flesh, and it hurt like gangbusters when it hit you. And so he might be referring to this whip that's called a scorpion, or he might be speaking in figurative terms here, saying, oh, you think it's bad to be hit by a whip? Whenever I punish you, it's going to be like being stung by the scorpions over here. And you think, in some cases, you do die when you're hit from it. So it could be literal, it could be figurative. By the way, this response that he gives, does this sound familiar to you at all? You have Israelites who are oppressed, and they ask, hey, please just help us out here. Give us a little bit of reprieve. And then the ruler says, oh, you think that's bad? I'm going to make it 10 times worse on you. Let's take your mind back to Egypt when I'm sorry. Okay, very good. Good, go ahead. I'm going to come back to you. Very good. Okay, in Egypt, whenever the Israelites say, hey, and Moses makes the request, let us go out into the wilderness. We want to sacrifice to our God. Just give us a little bit of time. We'll come back in. We'll get right back to work. And Pharaoh is furious about this. And he says, oh, you think it was hard to make bricks before? You're going to have to meet the same quota that you did in the days prior. But now we're not going to give you the straw. You have to go out and gather that straw and then still find the time to make the same amount of bricks. Now, where's this guy been hanging out, Jeroboam? For years, probably, maybe even a decade and a half. He's been hanging out in Egypt talking to the king. They know their history, don't they? They know how to deal with these disobedient subjects, these peasants. Starting to act like the people of Egypt. Verse 12. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had directed, saying, come back to me the third day. Then the king answered the people roughly. That's the opposite of the advice. Answer them. Well, he does answer them, but he says, speak good words. Speak kindly and respectfully to them. He doesn't. He talks down to them like he's Lord of Lords. And he had rejected the advice the elders had given him. He spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges or scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for the turn of events was from the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord had spoken by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. And if you recall, for our regulars, that goes back to chapter 11. We won't reread that. But in chapter 11, God sends this Israelite prophet named Ahijah, and he tells Jeroboam, because of the sins of Solomon, I'm going to strip the power from him, and I'm going to give you, and he takes this garment and a robe and tears it up into pieces, and he gives him 10 pieces, and he says, you're going to have 10 of the tribes of Israel. This is in fulfillment to God's prophecy. Verse 16, now when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, saying, what share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to your own house, O David. So Israel departed to their tents. What they said as a collective voice is the same thing that Patrick Henry said when the King of England would not listen to the people's petition and the redress of grievances that they offered to him. And he said, well, I'll tell you where I stand. You give me liberty, you give me freedom, or give me death. I have no reason to live any longer. They say, what share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Essentially, they're saying, give me freedom or give me death. That's what I want. there may be a little slight here. Go to your tents, O Israel. Notice the plurality. Tents. And then he says, go to your house, singular, O David. Remember the prophecy? Well, we will all essentially withdraw from you. You want to have your own entity? Well, you can have your one little part, and then we'll go to all the big part, and we'll split off of you because we're all in agreement against you. Verse 17, but Rehoboam reigned over the children of Israel who dwelt in the cities of Judah. Now, it appears geographically, the location at this point, it has not yet changed, and he's still in, or at least in the vicinity of Shechem. So he's still spending time in the territory of Israel. Even though they've said, we have nothing to do with you, this is our land now. Essentially, they've told him to get out, but he hasn't really listened. Verse 18, then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was in charge of the revenue. But all Israel stoned him with stones, and he died. And if Rehoboam didn't take things seriously before, I guarantee you he is at this point. I've sent my collector of revenue. I mean, that's like the king himself, his representative, and they kill him. Rehoboam realizes that's what that means for me. That's what they would like to do to me. And if they get their hands on me, they will. He's afraid. So King Rehoboam mounted his chariot in haste to flee to Jerusalem. He knows he's not safe in Israel anymore. And he goes back home to the territory of Judah. Verse 19 tells us, so Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. That's, of course, at the time of the writing. Now it came to pass when all Israel heard that Jeroboam had come back, they sent for him and called him to the congregation and made him king over all Israel. There was none who followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. They said, we're our own people. Hey, we're going to have a leader. Eeny, meeny, miny, we're all in agreement. Jeroboam, the guy who understands, the one who didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth, the common person, the blue-collar worker, that's the guy we want leading us. This man could do great things if he wants for the people of God in the northern section of the kingdom. Verse 21, when Rehoboam came to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah with the tribe of Benjamin, 180,000 chosen men who were warriors. 180,000. That's roughly a fifth of 1,000,000 foot soldiers. You think Rehoboam doesn't mean business about this? By the way, in our own nation's history, when the South says, okay, well, you want things this way? Well, we'll do things our way. We're all in agreement. And there was the split off. And what's the president of the Union do? I know there's Fort Sumter and shots fired and all that kind of stuff. There are different accounts of that too, by the way. But regardless of who fired the first shots and at Fort Sumter, the president of the Union gathered the troops together. So we're not going to have that. We're going to go to battle over this. And the king of the south of Israel says exactly the same thing, the king over Judah. He gets together a fifth of 1,000,000 soldiers and says, we're going to settle this right now. Verse 22, but the word of God came to Shemaiah, the man of God, saying, speak to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, to all the house of Judah and Benjamin. So here we find it's not just one. It's one major nation, and then one major tribe, and then there's one other blended in, and this is Benjamin. Speak to all the house of Judah and Benjamin and to the rest of the people, saying, thus says the Lord, you shall not go up, nor fight against your brethren, the children of Israel. Let every man return to his house, for this thing is from me. Therefore they obeyed the word of the Lord and turned back according to the word of the Lord. So Israel and Judah, they're ready to do battle and solve this civil conflict right then and there. And God tells them both, no. I don't want you doing this. First of all, you're brethren. You should not be slaughtering each other in battle because there's a disagreement, number one. I wish our country would have thought a little bit more about that before getting into, back in 1861, what took place. And the second thing is this. He says, it's from me. It's punishment. It's being sent out. There needs to be a division in the kingdom. So, give both sides credit. They listen to God in this. And they say, okay, that's what the Lord says, and we're not going to fight over this. I want to look now into some dangerous things that begin to take place during the reign of Jeroboam. This is going to be in the northern portion of the kingdom, upper 10 tribes. Verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim and dwelt there. Also he went out from there and built Peniel, or you might have in your Bible Peniel with an I instead of a U in the name. There's an I here on the map. Notice that's on the east side of the Jordan River. And notice it's basically just an exact latitude where it's found. What do you think is meant by Jeroboam built Shechem? Well, there's already a city there. Peniel, maybe there's something there, not as much, and he builds that. What do you think is meant by that? He builds these places. There you go. He designates these as very important political spots. Why Shechem? Well, it's somewhat centrally located even in the northern portion. Maybe not perfect, but somewhat so. And then on the east side, notice on the same latitude, he's going to need to now go to the east because the east is going to belong to the northern portion of the divided kingdom. He'll need to go over there and transact business, and this will be another place where he can go in a comfortable spot for him to stay. Makes a lot of sense strategically. Verse 26, and Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David. He doesn't want that to happen. He's saying the kingdom could become united again, so I have to keep that from happening. He mentions if these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord, lowercase l, Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. What he's saying is that if I allow the worship of God's people to continue as it's been, I'm going to lose my power and my kingdom. I can't let the people go back to Jerusalem and worship God in the temple as they once have. Now, what's the issue with that line of thinking for Jeroboam? God said, hey, it's of me, the division of the kingdom. What has he never said? You don't have to answer that, but. Right, he's afraid of that, right? In verse 26, now the kingdom may return to the house of David. He doesn't want that to happen. He's afraid of it. So he says, I can't let them go back and worship God. The only issue is God has told them to worship in this way. He's never given them new worship regulations. And so he begins to alter the worship of God by his own thinking. Verse 28, therefore the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, if it's too much for you, do you feel like it's too long of a journey to make to Jerusalem? That's really inconvenient. Don't you think? Leading the witness. Sustained. Nevertheless, here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. Does this sound familiar? Golden calves to fall down before, saying, these are the gods that saved you from Egypt, O Israel. Verse 29, he put one in Bethel and the other he put in Dan. Notice the locations. One in the north, one in the south. So if you live in the south, you shouldn't have to travel really far to worship God. You live in the north, you shouldn't have to go way south to worship the Lord. That religion's too inconvenient. And so he makes religion that's convenient for all the people. People like this. God doesn't. Verse 30, now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. He has not given them permission to worship in another place other than Jerusalem. Jeroboam made shrines on the high places and made priests from every class of people who are not of the sons of Levi. The issue of which is, God says priests are to come from Levi. He says, oh, priests can come from any tribe, which makes a lot of sense for him. He doesn't have any Levites, right? But he doesn't. He makes them from wherever they want. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. And at Bethel he installed the priests of the high places which he had made. When he says, like Israel, Leviticus 23, there is a feast, the Feast of Tabernacles or booths, on the 15th day of the 7th month. He makes a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the one in Israel, and it's to celebrate the God who had brought them out of Egypt. He's doing this to celebrate the calves, the golden calves, which he said brought them out of the land of Egypt. He's making a mockery out of God's religion. Verse 33, last one. So he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, in the month which he had devised in his own heart. And he ordained a feast for the children of Israel and offered sacrifices on these pagan altars and burned incense. He's doing things the way he wants to do them. Next week we'll talk about from chapter 13, what does God think about all of this? If it seems like it's a complete mess in Israel, that's because it is. A new nation, look at this objectively. A new nation is attempting to be formed. They're trying to figure everything out, but the problem is this. They're doing it according to their own whims and not according to God's plans. We shouldn't be surprised that for about 50 years, it's just total chaos in the land of Israel. God's going to have a message for his new king of the north, Jeroboam, next week. Let's read about that in chapter 13, and let's memorize verse 33 of chapter 13. 1 Kings 13:33. Okay, any final remarks before we dismiss, though? Okay, we'll pick it up then.